Oh, I just flew in on this rental. Can you valet this for me? Thank you so much. Welcome to the Brittani Starr Show.
Yes, I see a spooky future in front of you. Welcome to our Friday the 13th episode. May luck ever be on our side.
What better day to embark on this day of mystery and intrigue than this magical Friday the 13th? Today I'm joined by two incredible authors of the enigmatic and fantastical. Luke Eastwood, a prolific indie author, is here to discuss the roots of Halloween with his book, Samhain, The Roots of Halloween. Hello and welcome to a very special episode. I'm your host, Brittani Starr, and today we've conjured up a little something extraordinary just in time for a spine-tingling Friday the 13th. Our guest today for this darkly enchanting episode is none other than the talented author Luke Eastwood. He's here to guide us through the shadowy origins of Halloween as explained in his book, Samhain, The Roots of Halloween. But that's not all. Luke's interests extend beyond folklore and tradition. He delves into the depths of mental health, providing insights that will help guide you on your journey. Please join me in welcoming Luke Eastwood to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Brittany. I'm delighted to be here.
Can you share with us some key takeaways from your book, Samhain, The Roots of Halloween?
Yeah, well, it's quite a big subject, so um, I tried to keep the book fairly kind of small, but you could write masses and masses because the traditions associated with it they go back into the distant past. They really do. So I mean, Halloween is the descendant of a much older festival in Ireland that's called Samhain. And that goes back to the time of the Druids and probably even longer than that. So that basically, it's sort of, you're probably familiar with the Mexican idea of the Day of the Dead. It's very similar in essence to that. That's kind of very, very similar. In fact, it takes place at a similar time of year. So um, I had a look. I mentioned a bit about that in the book, but that goes back to sort of a pre-Christian era of sort of the Mexican, Central American gods and goddesses, and you've got a similar thing in Ireland and probably all across Europe to some extent. You've got sort of these pagan gods and goddesses, and all these rituals that happen throughout the year. And this particular time of year is very much associated with death and the ancestors, and particularly venerating their ancestors and inviting their spirit to return. In the older tradition, you don't have this idea that when you die, you go up there, when you go down there, and there's no return. That that idea is kind of quite foreign to the pre-Christian thinking, and the idea was that what you call, I suppose, the veil between worlds, between the realm of the dead and the realm of the living, became very thin at three times a year, which is the Halloween time called Samhain, and then the other times would be what's called Beeltena, which is like May Day, and then the summer solstice in the middle, which is around the 20th, the 21st of June. These are three times where this kind of barrier between the worlds is very, very thin. So that means that you could experience contact with the spirit world, with the dead, with the ghosts, and also with the realm of otherworldly beings like fairies, and other such things people might refer to as gnomes as well, and various other creatures. And also the rest of the realm of the gods as well that you might experience through. through prayer or invocation, calling upon the gods, and that might be more powerful at these times too. So this is really, really very, very old. You're talking the earliest known instances in Ireland is going back to a place called Cloughtler, which is in County Meath, which is right in the middle. You have these 5 kingdoms in ancient Ireland, and the middle one is called Meath, or Meath in the original name. And there you had this place which was very special to the Druids, which is called Cloughtler, and they had these sacred fires which were lit. And that's actually something that's been recommenced in the last 20 odd years. Has been the modern pagan movement have kind of restarted that, and it continues now in a sort of more formalized way, I suppose, with the Puka festival, which happens around Halloween. But Halloween itself, I suppose, isn't actually anything to do with paganism or to do with the dead in the original sense of the festival. It was actually refers to All Hallows Eve, which is for the eve of All Hallows Day, and following that is All Saints Day. Well, there are 2 festivals that were created literally to replace this festival of the dead, you know, because the church didn't like this practice. They didn't like it at all. They wanted to ban it completely. So what better thing to do than create something else and put it on top? You could say that Easter has been done with the same thing in mind, and Christmas, of course, as well. So trying to change the traditions of people. And I suppose anywhere in the world, people have had traditions for a very long time. They don't want to change them. So you have to kind of do something special to try and get people to change. And that's what Halloween was about. But it's actually become something that's taken a lot of these old traditions, these pagan traditions, and they've been brought forward into the modern era through Halloween and all these spooky associations. And in many cases, the context has been lost, the reasons behind it, but the practices still exist, like the whole trick or treat thing. There was very much a sort of mischief-making thing with turning things on their head, turning things upside down, so to speak. So there have been a tradition here that even exists now today of like turning road signs to face the wrong way. So there's there's a sign going that way, says, to Dingletown or whatever. They turn it the other way, so it's facing towards Tralee, and to confuse people. They do a lot of this was supposedly around trying to confuse the fairies as well, but that thing has then mutated into sort of playing trick or treat is the modern kind of version of that. But it really comes from these old sort of a thing of reversing things and turning things about face. But like now, if you ask most children why are we doing it, they couldn't tell you why. They just know that you go out and you go from house to house. The thing of tricking doesn't seem to be as common as it used to be. Usually, when I was a child, it would be the person opening the door might say, "Okay, you go for the trick," and you don't get a treat. So either they try and trick you, they might have a bucket of water, or you try and do something prank on them. Often people now they wanted you to do something to get your bit of chocolate or whatever it is. They might want you to sing a song or do a little dance or do some kind of a thing. I mean, it's good to see it going in the age of the telephone being omnipresent and your smartphones. It's good to see this thing still surviving into the modern era, even if it has kind of the meaning behind it has somewhat changed.
Can you tell people a little bit about your history and why you are an authority on this subject?
Well, I wouldn't like to call myself an authority as such. But thank you. That's a nice thing to say. But okay, well, I'm actually should be clear. I'm not actually from Ireland originally. I was born in Scotland, and I left there and ended up living in England, and I spent about half my life living in Ireland. So I've been very interested in the ancient culture with Druidism. I started out being a Roman Catholic, and I kind of realized I wasn't very happy with that, and I wanted to sort of explore the roots of Christianity, perhaps. And then I kind of realized a lot of it actually came from other religions and actually from the pagan past before that. A lot of things that we probably think of as Christian tradition actually come from much earlier times. And I got more and more interested in sort of Celtic mythology and the Druids, and I'm very much into the environment thing and nature. So this whole kind of Druid thing seems to fit for me. So I got very interested in that. And then I was invited to this place up in County Meath called Clockter by a bunch of Druids for like a ceremony. And that was a long time ago. I think that was in 2003. And that's really when I kind of began to have a much deeper understanding of the origins of this festival. I mean, I did know a fair bit about it from, my studies of Druidism and, what I picked up from other people. But I looked into it more and more. And I have to say, I have had an awful lot of help with putting this book together. I mean, I wrote the book, but there's loads and loads of people that helped me out in terms of telling me things, pointing me at various stuff. There was a guy who wrote a previous book called John Gilroy, which that's out of print, his book on Clockter. But, that was very handy. And people who'd done interviews with local people, a lady who'd been organizing the ceremonies there called Jeremy McGowan, she was so helpful. So, I mean, I pulled together stuff from all over. I got to interview this old Breton woman who was like 93 at the time. And the traditions there are very similar. You'll find similar traditions in Wales and Scotland and parts of Northern England, especially. Not so much Southern England, but the north of England, Scotland, Wales, and Brittany. Yeah, you find a lot of overlap with the Irish traditions. So it may be the case that what survived, particularly in Ireland, very strongly, may have been spread over a lot of Western Europe. It may have been in other parts. We don't know. But then you've also got some overlaps with Scandinavia in the traditions. They had a huge influence across Ireland and Scotland and the whole of the British Isles, and of course France too. So some of this stuff in relation, like the Wild Hunt, that could be traced back probably to Odin of the Norse mythology. Some of it's quite clear where it came from, and other things it's not so clear, and things kind of get lost in the mists of time. But it's very clear that this whole festival it's steeped in the past. It's steeped in the religion and mythology and traditions of the pre-Christian era.
This is the veil is thin at this time, and we can talk to spirits. And what do we do with that? Like, if the veil is thin, now we can talk to a spirit. What do we do when we talk to them?
Well, a really popular thing was divination and prophecy in the past. So I suppose that, people could say great granny comes, and you might, if you're able to speak to great granny and ask her some advice about your life or what's going to happen. There was a belief that the dead could see into the future. And then there's a lot of divination practices around such things as apples and hazelnuts and fruit. And there's a weird tradition that survived with this kind of loaf. It's like a fruit loaf called a barmbrack. If you got the ring that's inside it, then the tradition is that you would be getting married within the next year. So that's still going now. You can go down to the local shop and get the barmbrack, and hopefully you wouldn't swallow the ring because they're not really that big. It's sort of like barely big enough to get onto your, just big enough to get onto your little finger, probably. So it would actually be quite. I don't know of anyone ever swallowing it, but you could in theory end up swallowing the ring instead of getting it. And that would say, oh yeah, people don't really believe that so much now. It's just a bit of fun. Whereas people have taken divination a lot more seriously in the past. And so they actually talking to the ancestors. I suppose there's kind of I suppose with a lot of things of science and religion kind of dying off to some extent, the kind of belief in the other world, in the idea that your ancestors could come back and visit you, maybe that's kind of become less of a thing. And a lot of people probably don't believe such a thing is actually possible anymore. Whereas in the past, that would have been the case. Certainly in some parts of the world, that's still very strongly believed. Like look at China, modern day China. People still have huge veneration for the ancestors, and they would pray to their ancestors and leave offerings to them even now, and certainly in rural China. So in a way, I suppose you could say this is sort of making a resurgence with the interest in Halloween. And I mean, Halloween is so popular now, but for a lot of people, they don't know where it's come from or what the meaning is of many of these things. So, I mean, that was one of the reasons why I thought it was important to do this book, was to actually flesh out what it's about, what the festival is really about, and why we do these things, and where it actually came from. Where it's very clear that we have a record of Ireland. We know where it came from in Ireland, but there are other countries where similar festivals existed, probably, where that may be completely lost. The origin and the history of it's gone. So we're very fortunate in Ireland to actually have some knowledge of this ancient festival and what it was about, and where it was, where the epicenter of it was.
Are you practicing pagan now then?
Yeah, I have been for quite a long time. Well, I suppose it'll be about sort of the mid-90s that I kind of decided that I think I preferred a pagan path. I don't specifically think one particular form of spirituality is better than another. I think they're all valid in a way. I mean, I think we're kind of a bit like fish in a goldfish bowl. We have a limited perspective of the world and creation and whatever God or the gods are. We're so limited in our human understanding. I think we have to quite often put a sort of a human face on things to understand the world, and I think we've done that with deity, with the stories of the creation and how we got here and what the world is for and about. We kind of put ourselves at the center of the story. So I think in a way, all these religions, they have an element of truth, but I think we're still basically like fish in a bowl. We don't really know what's going on. We're just trying to understand it in our limited way. And for me, this is a path that works for me, and it makes sense for myself. So I wouldn't like to say to anyone, yeah, oh, this is the right way. You should do this. You should do that. You should follow this path. Because everybody's different. I think you have to try and find your own way to understand your own spiritual life and your place in the world.
You also authored many other books. Samhain is not the only one. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah, well, I've some recent stuff I've done, some like on mythology and folk tales, some like updated of old stories around Kerry, where I live, and the Dingle area. I also did a kind of short environmental book called How to Save the Planet, because I think it's very important that we try to move forward into a better place. I we've got so clever, but at the same time, we seem to all our cleverness, we've created more and more problems for ourselves. So I think I tried to write a it's a very short book. It's only like 10,000 words. Each section is like 1,000. I thought, right, if you can't convince someone or tell them like a better way to do something in 1,000 words, then you might as well give up, because if you need to write a whole book to tell somebody something at great length, then obviously you're not very convincing. I think a lot of these things could be distilled down to very simple things about how we can try to be more kind to the environment, without having to go and live in a mud hut somewhere. So, I mean, I tried to distill that down into 10 things that you could do as an individual that would make a big difference to our impact on the planet. Because I don't like to think, if I have one child, and like, I don't want her or her children to have to live in some awful, terrible place because we messed it all up. So I think it's really up to us to make a difference now, because going forward, I think there's huge potential. The nature is incredible and very resilient, but there's limits to what it can put up with, and we got to make more effort to make less of an impact on the earth, because we don't have anywhere else to go,
Absolutely. Self-development and mental health is another topic for you that's of great importance. Can you talk to us about that? Why is it important, and what are some tips that you might have?
Yeah, well, I did spend a while working at an addiction therapy center, and one thing I've noticed a lot about modern life, there seems to be an awful amount of addiction in the world. Certainly in Ireland, it's become kind of a sort of silent epidemic. Huge numbers of people who are addicted to alcohol and drugs and other things like gambling and pornography, or just online life, where they just glued to the internet almost 24/7. They go to bed and the last thing they see is a phone. And I think it is impacting on people's mental health. Or you could, it's almost like a chicken and egg thing in some ways. You could say that the indulging in these things is creating a mental health problem, and maybe people are doing these things because it's a coping mechanism for the difficulties of modern life or trauma that people have experienced. So, I mean, it's a great thing that mental health is something that is being discussed more and more, because you talk about previous generations. I certainly know from my parents and my grandparents' generation, a lot of things were taboo, that you just wouldn't be able to discuss it. But then you could get to a certain point where your whole life becomes about mental health as well, which that's not necessarily a good thing if you become so obsessed with your mental health that you don't actually live, that you're thinking about that constantly. So I think there's sort of a happy medium where you need to attend to the problems in your life in a healthy way, but hopefully not without becoming obsessed. And I really think this whole idea of taboo subjects is not a healthy thing, where if you do have a problem that you can't discuss it or bring it up, that's really unhealthy. I mean, one thing you may be aware of here was the huge crisis with the Catholic Church with abuse of children. And that was really, really swept under the carpet for a long time. And you can see the effects it's had on people that have been traumatized by their experiences and basically told to shut up by their parents, by the church, by the local priests, the communities. And of course, there's a lot of regret now when it's clear that, you know, there's certain people that did these terrible things, but at the time, you know, they weren't believed and they were humiliated and told to shut up. So I think it's really important. I think there is such a thing as generational trauma, where bad experiences can be transferred from one generation to the next. And it's sort of very much a sort of a spiritual malaise, if you like, where the trauma is not dealt with in the current generation and it's passed on to your children, and then it can be passed on to them. And certainly in terms of abuse, there's certainly a scientific theory that many people who are abused are the ones that go on to actually become abusers themselves. And they, you know, they become abusive because they've been abused. And it just goes on and on down generations, unless there's some kind of intervention to prevent that kind of thing happening. So,
And do you think the prevention comes from talking, being able to actually have a conversation, saying, look, I'm struggling, I'm having a problem, what do I do?
Yeah, well, I think definitely some kind of therapy is needed. In many cases, I suppose in the past, there might have been an older family member who you could go and speak to, maybe a grandparent or something. Back in, it's not really that far in the past where people lived with multiple generations in one house. So you might be able to go and talk to a trusted older family member about problems you're having in your life. Whereas now, for many people, you know, therapy with a psychologist or psychotherapist is more of an option if you're not in a position where you've got someone in your family who you can really trust. But I think either way, that's a very healthy thing if you've got the ability to go and talk things through. I think far more than taking medicines, this can be an effective solution. I'm not saying that sort of psychoactive drugs aren't any help. For some people, that is a necessary thing, and they do need medication. But I would say, I mean, it's been suggested many times that there's over medication, that a lot of people who have problems are just medicated when really what they need is someone to listen to them and to talk through their problems, and they could find their own way of dealing with their trauma if only they had the opportunity to talk it through with someone who was sympathetic, who could offer them guidance. Whereas, you know, sometimes you go off to the doctor and they just got to give you antidepressants. They don't want to hear what the problems are. I don't think that's a fix-all. It just doesn't work, in my opinion.
We are getting to the end here. Can you tell us what's next on your journey? Do you have any new projects coming up?
Yeah, well, I have a new book coming out in April, which is a kind of collection of essays on Druidism. It's kind of all across the board. It's stuff, it's almost a 20-year period the book covers. So I'm very pleased about that. And I'm kind of working on doing an actual video course on Druidism, which there's a publisher in UK asked me to do that, and it's something new to me. But I suppose that one of the things about the modern druid path is it's difficult to find somebody in the way that maybe it would have been in the past, where there would have been a school of druidism. If you showed aptitude, you could go and perhaps enroll or ask if you could be allowed to be taught. I suppose, I mean, in a much the same way, you had monasteries where a novice would go and join, and they'd be taught by older monks, or and then they'd be initiated into sort of the order. The same thing would happen with the druids, but now kind of in the modern era, it's kind of different. So for many people, they have to learn online or through correspondence. Obviously, the ideal situation is if you sit down by the fire and you talk and you teach someone and whatever. But in the modern world, people are separated by vast distances often, and that's just not going to be practical for many people. So, I was invited to do this, so I thought, yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. Rather than just having things written down, there's a different quality to actually, verbal communication. And when you can see somebody, I don't know what it is, but I think it's been said that 80% of our communication is actually non-verbal from what you can see. So I think there is something different about actually speaking to someone in real life. When you can see their face, you can see their eyes, you can see their movements, their expression, and the tone of their voice. Whereas the written word is very powerful, and it's something there forever. But you kind of lose something in a way that isn't transmitted through words on a page. That there's a different quality to actually talking to a person.
I do. I agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on this amazing Friday the 13th, taking the time out of your day. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much for having me. And, I don't consider it an unlucky day. You consider in the past, 13 moons is the association there, and it's been turned around. And so women's cycle again of 13 periods over a year. That's been kind of turned around as something negative, and it's not an unlucky number at all in reality, I think, but it kind of got demonized. So even here in Ireland, you see a street goes 12 and then 14, and sometimes they missed out on number 13 because no one would want to buy number 13 in the street. And it's not funny how such a thing stuck, that weird superstition. But it's really isn't a bad number at all. But it's been made into something that's superstitious and spooky and frightening when it really shouldn't be.
Agreed. We hope you've enjoyed this captivating journey into the realms of Halloween's history and the complexities of mental health. Luke Eastwood's insights have certainly added a new layer of depth to our understanding.
The veil of the worlds grows thin as we explore the origins of this spooky holiday. And then we have Brian Fitzpatrick, who after a childhood encounter with horror films, embarked on a path of writing that blends the terrifying with the safe. His best-selling Metcraft trilogy will send shivers down your spine as we dive into the world of sentient nanotech and fantastical cult leaders. Perhaps even a black cat known to be a witch's familiar might make an appearance.
I predict spine-tingling tales, laughter, and perhaps a few ghostly surprises on today's show. We'll discuss deep topics, writing techniques, and even a touch upon paranormal investigations. Remember, when we're honest with ourselves, we know that all of us hold both dark and light within.
So fasten your seatbelts, my friends, as we embark on a journey into the unknown. Grab a cozy blanket, turn down the lights, and prepare for an episode that'll leave you both haunted and entertained. This is the Brittani Starr Show. Get ready to unlock the secrets of your soul and share some spine-tingling stories. Joining us now is the multi-talented Brian Fitzpatrick, master of science fiction, books, and film. He's also an explorer of the paranormal, unraveling mysteries in the dark. Welcome to the show, Brian Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Brittany. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I follow you on Facebook, and I noticed that we're both huge fans of Night of the Living Dead. Can you tell us about the story of when you first watched that and how that inspired your horror-loving ways?
I'll tell you, that movie, Night of the Living Dead, the classic, it is the catalyst for everything I've done ever since. At age 7, I accidentally watched that movie, and Mom had fallen asleep, dozed off, and it came on, and 7-year-old me couldn't look away. I was terrified, but I just couldn't stop watching. I had to see what happened. And needless to say, it was about a week of sleepless nights, nightmares all the time. And finally, at the end of it, I kind of got into the idea that I could be so scared, but I was totally safe. And my mom actually encouraged me to write some scary stories of my own. And she didn't know what she started. And I've been writing stories of science fiction and horror ever since.
So do you still run around saying lines from, do you have any siblings or anything? Because I chase my kids around sometimes and say, I'm coming for you, Barbara.
Barbara. No, I don't, I don't get to quote the lines enough. I need to incorporate more of that into my life.
I think you should. Can you tell the audience, you are a really fascinating man. You have a best-selling trilogy, Metcraft. Tell us a little bit about that, but you're also a screenwriter with a screenplay that's in production.
True, yes. Thank you. Metcraft is a really intense science fiction action thriller that I got the idea when I read a medical article about how nanotechnology would one day be used to fight cancerous cells in a human being. The science behind it would be that they inject nanotech into a person, and they're just basically microscopic smart robots, and they would attack the harmful cells and then leave. I thought, well, what if that nanotechnology will and could connect to the host? And then I thought, well, wait a minute, what if the host could like summon it out of their skin in like a liquid metal form? I think of like Terminator 2, how the liquid metal Terminator looked. And so they're now I'd created a whole group of people who could do this, have this power. And then of course I said, well, they have to argue with each other. So I split them into 3 warring factions in Los Angeles. And my main character is the first ever person born with that nanotechnology in their DNA already. And so everyone suspects his powers are going to be a lot different than everybody else's. So the 3 factions at war with each other want to control him. And so the first book is all about him and 2 other young Metcraft users fighting their way through and getting themselves to a safe house. It's just nonstop action because I originally wrote it as a screenplay. So the idea was to, have a big action movie on screen. And when I converted it to a book, it was a lot of fun because then I could get into the characters' heads and deal with what they're thinking. By far, the favorite character from the audience is the villain. Her name is Sasha, and she is relentless and obsessed with our main character. And they develop a weird sort of symbiotic relationship. They hate each other, but they need each other. It's great.
And now, what about your screenplay?
So I was last year I was hired to write a science fiction screenplay from actress and producer Gina Nemo. She used to be on 21 Jump Street, the original with Johnny Depp, and she's been producing a lot of movies too. And so she and I connected through a Facebook group a long time ago, and she asked me if I would come in and co-write this screenplay with her. And so she gave me a ton of notes and said that she was financing this one herself. And so it was science fiction, but there was no budget for special effects or choreographed fight scenes. So I'm like, how am I going to write a science fiction thriller with none of those things in it? So I tapped into who else has done that. And of course, Twilight Zone, the old Twilight Zone show, they did a lot with no money. And so I kind of tapped into my inner Twilight Zone and wrote this contained one location science fiction thriller with six in a near future where six people are trapped in this old warehouse and they start accusing each other of a terrorist act that happened earlier on in the day. And so while they're accusing each other, there's a supernatural element that starts to come into play. And I had very limited time to do it. She told me in like late January that I had till April to give her the script so she could have her actors start memorizing. She had the location in place, the director in place, the actors in place, but needed a story. And so the script was in a very early format. And so she asked me to come be the script supervisor on set. So I had the very rare privilege of being on set for the filming of something that I wrote. And that was just a cool, hard situation. It was the best hard work I ever did.
That's a great way of putting it. So is this one still being filmed or has it finished?
The film is finished. It's called The Simian Trials, and it is still in post. It's being edited, and it hopefully will be out before the end of the year, if not early next year. And I don't know if she's going to go film festival circuit with it to get a development distribution deal, or if she's just going to launch it straight into theaters. I'm not privy to that information yet. But it was a lot of fun.
Is this your first screenplay then?
No, actually, I've been writing screenplays for about a dozen years. This is the first one that got produced, though. So
That's amazing.
it's been a whirlwind time.
So what are you doing right now? Are you still writing another in your series? Is the trilogy?
Well, what's funny is when the third Metcraft book got launched, the publisher, Black Rose Writing, they're out of Texas. The CEO called me and said, "Well, do you have more Metcraft books coming?" And I kind of was like, "No, I'm kind of done with the trilogy." And then as soon as we hung up the phone, my brain started working, and I ended up writing the outline for 3 more books. So those will hopefully I'll be able to start writing those next year. My current project, though, I had the very good fortune to be commissioned to write a Dungeons and Dragons fantasy adventure novel, and I'm so honored to be part of that legacy. I grew up on playing D&D, and the fact that they brought me in to write this fantasy novel that is going to be tie into a release of a massive campaign that they got coming out called the Black Ballad. And it's basically what happens when your characters die. It's a whole adventure takes place in the afterlife. And my novel is set in that same afterlife with my own characters and my own storylines, but it's connected to that world.
Tell us more about this world.
So yeah, for D&D, you have a setting. The dungeon master has the setting and basically the environment, and the players have characters that interact in it. And this world is actually coming from a company called Storytellers Forge, and they have the permissions from D&D to create this campaign. And the campaign itself, when played, is about a year long. It's over the book itself is like over 300 pages. It's huge. And they are bringing in authors to write related fantasy novels, not of their characters and their storyline, but set in that Black Ballad world, which is a very cool place. It's an underworld. It's sort of a purgatory. It's where all of the religions of D&D gather in the afterlife, and everybody sort of gets along or fights. And there's great new species down there, and there's great new magical effects because everyone's dead. How do you have any, you're dead. How do you have any danger? Well, they figured out a way to that even your dead soul can die. The mechanics are wonderful. And so I'm writing a book about a incredibly badass warrior magic user. She died battling a god in another realm, she was killed in the process of killing that god, and a little bit of that god's soul got pummeled into her body when she died. And so now here in the afterlife, she wakes up, she doesn't know where she is. She's got some companions, and she later discovers that she is actually carrying a living part of that god's soul in her, and it's sentient and it's trying to take her over, and she's arguing with it, and she wants to get it out of her. So the whole mission is basically to find a way to remove this last little bit of that evil god and destroy it.
This is fascinating.
Kind
You
of
are
a, it's
such
kind
a
of a,
varied artist.
thank you. It's kind of a really sick, twisted Wizard of Oz. Because they're on a journey to a place and they gather more companions along the way.
Fantastic. Can you talk to us about your writing process? How do you get your creative juices flowing, and what advice do you have for aspiring authors or screenwriters?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, because I'm just a guy. I'm just a regular person who just pursued and just kept persistence. And I just told myself, do I really want to make this a career? And if I do, I've got to get a thicker skin for criticisms. I've got to pursue and have persistence even when I get rejections. I call it the mirror conversation. You have to have a conversation with yourself and really look yourself in the mirror and say, what am I willing to do to get to that career level? And you find out what you're made of. It's like I have a mantra that I use when early on when I was struggling and not getting paid. Hope and perseverance. Those two things kept me going in the early days. Just writing stuff just to get practice, also to query publishers and query production companies and studios and agents. A lot of rejection. In this business, of the people who want to be screenwriters, 1% of them finish a script. Of that 1%, like 0.1% actually get a sale on a script. It's near impossible, but you can find assignments. You can be a good writer and get paid to write other people's things as a professional. That's what most writers do. And so knowing that, I said, I'm going to hone whatever skills I can and just practice so that I can get hired to write other people's material, but make it my own, put my voice into it and put my skill into it. And that's kind of what I do. My writing process is, I'm kind of regimented. I don't do a lot of writers beat themselves up if they don't write X number of hours a day. And my life is too busy. I can't commit to that. So I forgive myself for not writing a couple of days a week, but I'll try and carve out like an 8-hour day on a weekend, or 2 hours a couple times a week just to get things done. Unless there's a deadline. If there's a deadline, I take vacation days from work and I write without sleep for weeks at a time, which is brutal, but deadlines are deadlines. My advice for new and upcoming writers is network. Definitely get out there into the areas let's say you're going to be a science fiction writer or a horror writer or a romance writer. Get into those groups online and make friends and meet those people. And if you can ever go to in-person events, whatever city you live in, always go and always meet people. I know as writers, we tend to be introverts and don't like to get social and don't like to do all that marketing and networking and stuff. But I look at networking as I'm building genuine relationships. When I'm networking with people, I genuinely want to have a long-term business relationship or friendship with them, depending on how it goes. And it usually works. It develops into something really cool. And every gig I've gotten has been through this process, just meeting people either online or in person. And it just works. I know a friend of mine, a screenwriter, said success in the entertainment industry, which I put books into that too. He says it depends on 3 things: hard work, luck, and the actions of others. And I was like, whoa, that's so true. It's so true.
So you also do paranormal investigations. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. My wife and I are pretty morbid. We've been married for coming up on 32 years, and we've always been fascinated by ghost stories and ghostly things. And back in the early days when we were together, there was no such thing as ghost hunting or paranormal investigations. Nobody knew about the cool equipment you could get and all that kind of stuff. But we've always been fascinated by it. So we would go to haunted houses or houses we thought were haunted and hope to have experiences. And then somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s, we started learning about people actually doing investigations with equipment and with recordings and actual sort of scientific methods, and we thought this is for us. So we've been investigating the paranormal for about 17 years. We go in with a sort of a skeptic's eye. We if we go into a place, a location, and something mysterious or weird happens, we try and debunk it in any way we can. We say, okay, we try and find a logical explanation for that noise or that movement or whatever. And if we can't find any kind of logical thing, we kind of think, well, maybe that was paranormal. It was, exciting then. We belong to a group. We've been in several groups, but this current group, there's 8 of us, and all of us have a very similar mindset that we don't assume everything's paranormal. We analyze and we, scrutinize everything before we go call it paranormal. And as a group, and we've been to some amazing locations, stuff that is huge. And recently we investigated a very iconic location in Hollywood, so iconic that we had to sign NDAs that we would never talk about that place, and we couldn't bring in cameras or video recording of any kind. We could do audio and any other equipment, but we couldn't bring any video footage in there. And it was one of the greatest experiences. That place is really haunted and nobody knows about it.
Oh, wow.
I know. I wish I could talk about it because it was so flipping cool.
Well, that was my next question, is what was the most significant paranormal experience that you've had so far?
I would say one place that's reliable, we've been there about 5 times, is a old ship docked off of the San Diego harbor called the Star of India. Several ghost shows have done their stuff there. We know the person who's like the curator of the museum that's attached, and so we get in and get an overnight. We go in there. Used to be all night. We'd go in there at 10 o'clock at night. They lock you on the boat because they don't want the public coming up on the ramp, and you get free reign of the entire ship, 4 levels, with no supervision, no communication with the outside world. If we want to leave, we have to call the security guard on the next boat and have him come over. And that ship is so reliable. We always get hits. We always get communication. We always hear knocks and noises. And any of our devices, they always light up, mostly on cue. We'll do flashlight sessions where you take a mag flashlight and twist it so it's just off, just where the connection can be made. And then you start asking questions and you let the spirit know if they want to say yes and light the light. They just have to make finish the connection. And that one's hit and miss. You never know. It could be just random. But after you ask enough questions and you get answers on cue for long enough time, then you start to think, okay, I feel that we might be communicating with something intelligent here. And the flashlight sessions on that boat can last an hour or more sometimes of direct, yes, light up on command, turn it off on command, constant for like an hour. It's great.
And those are the ones you haven't been able to debunk?
Yeah, we can't. Everything we've gotten on there, we've never debunked anything. It's pretty much, I want to say everything's paranormal, but it feels like it is. When you are standing in one place on the second deck down, and you hear boot steps on the wooden planks 10 feet in front of you, and you're looking and there's nothing in front of you, and you're recording it and you hear it audibly, that's pretty intense.
It is pretty good. So how big is your team?
There's just 8 of us. We kept it real small. And most of the time, not everybody can go. So we usually get a group of 4, maybe 6. And that seems, between 3 and 5 and 3 and 6 is ideal because you don't want too many people, it means more noise. And so it's rare that all of us go. And when they do, we're always very professional and very quiet when communicating because we don't want to trample the evidence.
Do you do things like a seance, or how do you get spirits to talk to you?
Mostly we come in really with respect. We come in and we like, okay, there's a house that we do. It's kind of a house that's becoming a museum out in the Inland Empire in Southern California, and there's no power out there, so none of our devices will get a false reading because there's zero electricity in that house. But we go in there and we know the history of it, that the family was very religious, and they all live there. There's like a mother, father, an aunt, and uncle, and kids. There's a whole bunch of people that live there. And so when we come in, we knock, and we come in and we just sort of say, you know, thank you for letting us come in. And we just sort of come in with a lot of respect. And because we knew they were religious, we don't curse, which is hard. And we just come in with a lot of humility and respect for them. And we usually get them talking very easily. Sometimes there's spirits there that just don't really, you can sense that something's there, but they don't want to talk. Maybe they're just tired of having people in their house or something. But that house, there's a room upstairs that is always solid for the flashlight sessions. No other room will do it, but this one room, we will always get hits with light on, light off. And there's a cradle, like a little bassinet that's on like a rocker. And oftentimes we'll catch that thing moving by itself. And we do our best to debunk that every single time. We're like, oh, here it is, it's rocking again. So we've caught it on video. We lift it up. We make sure there's nothing causing it to do that. We make the windows are always closed. There's no breeze. We'll stomp around, make sure that nobody's footfalls on the floor are causing it to shake. And it'll play with us because we'll stop it from moving. We'll hold it steady and stop it, and then carry on with our conversation. And all of a sudden, it'll start rocking again. It's like, okay, it's messing with us. That one's always a
I want
favorite.
to hear about a time when you were terrified on one of your investigations.
To be honest with you, I've never once ever been terrified. We've never been in a situation. We have this belief that what we're dealing with it's just people. It's people who have moved on to another area, and maybe they're scared, maybe they're confused, maybe they're even a little angry. But I've never felt a distinct "we're in trouble." I've never. And I have. Well, I will say this one time. Okay, let me back up. There was one time on our very first investigation was a graveyard in the city of Ojai in California, which is north of LA and like east of Ventura. There's a graveyard there, a cemetery there called Nordhoff Cemetery, and there's no gates on it. So you can just come and go anytime you want, even at night, nobody cares. And it's known to be haunted by like a spirit of a Native American, a spirit of a little girl. And the person who took us there had been there several times, and she says there are shadow people here, and sometimes they come out, and sometimes they do stuff. I'm like, okay. And so while we were setting up our recording equipment, she, with this leader of this group, she and I went for a short stroll a little bit down this gravel road just to kind of get a lay of the land, get the feel for the place. And I thought I saw two times. I thought I saw shadow people, but it's always on the periphery, so I can't be positive. But on our way back to the group, I had two rocks thrown at me. They bounced off my shin and bounced off the gravel next to me. And there was like, what animal could have thrown a rock or what, so I'm like, okay, that was probably maybe the shadow people, and maybe they don't like men and they threw rocks at me. I don't know. I can't say, but at the time it happened, I was a little freaked out. I was like, what? Because it was so prominent. It was like the rock hit, and I was like, okay, that's not expected. But it didn't stop me from wanting to do this. It's such a fun hobby.
Has anyone else in your crew been so terrified they ran off?
No, never once. We keep we keep it really professional, and we keep it. We don't investigate. We have not investigated places that are known to have a lot of negativity. Like we haven't done a prison yet. We haven't done an asylum yet. And I know those places we would have to prepare ourselves for probably a lot of anger and maybe even confusion. And so we have not experienced any place that has had a super dose of negativity. So nobody's been terrified. The ghost, the TV shows really make it look like it's a whole thing, and it's mostly sitting in a quiet, dark room talking to the air. It's mostly what it is. But when you get hits, man, it's cool.
Do you get hits often, or is that here and there?
Throughout the years, we'll go to places we've never been, and there'll be nights when we get zero, like just nothing. And even our sensitive people who can sometimes feel spirits, they'll be like, there's nothing going on tonight. And so we just pack it up and, chalk it up to experience. But I would say these days with this group and the places we've gone, we've gotten hits every time. We've done lately in last year, we've done people's homes. Like people are experiencing trouble and they don't understand what's going on. We've experienced homes. We have done like at the Star of India again. We did that iconic place in Hollywood. We've done a few other locations and we've gotten hits everywhere we've been. For I'd say the last 7 or 8 places we visited, we've always had something happen. And I don't know if that's maybe the way our tactics are. Maybe it's because we come in with kindness and politeness. I don't know.
I can sense what your energy is, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. It's what it feels like anyway.
So you mentioned you have a love for cooking, particular jambalaya. If you had to create a dish that embodied the essence of your Metcraft series or the Simeon Trails, what would it be, and what ingredients would you include to infuse it with science fiction?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh man. Okay, so since Metcraft deals with liquid metal and people using their imaginations to create weapons with that metal, I would want to do something that's flexible, that can be moved around a lot. So I might do something with pasta, maybe some fettuccine, like thick noodles. I don't know how I would get the silver because the Metcraft, when it comes out of their skin, looks very chrome-like. And I'm thinking, how would I replicate that in a pasta dish? I don't know. It might be disgusting. But it was maybe I would thicken it up with some nice Parmesan cheese. I would have to throw some meat in there, just because I gotta have some meat. But and I have to make it dark. I don't know how I do that. That's a good question. Maybe a dessert where I could shape the cake with like fondant, and it stiffens it up, and then use silver frosting paint to get that chrome-like look out of it. There we go. That's the easy way out. Dessert, and I can make it silver.
Who doesn't like dessert?
Right. Let me just show you. This is how the cover looks, so you can see how it has that sort of chrome look to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I had to do something like that.
I think a cake would make more sense. But I do like the idea of pasta.
And I just thinking of shaping pasta and making it somehow a tall thing, like some sort of structure that stands up. I don't know.
That would be interesting. There's got to be a cooking show now, right?
Exactly. Oh man, I think I missed my calling. If I wasn't doing any of this, I would want to be a chef.
Oh, hey, there you go. You can have the Metcraft cooking series.
Yeah, Metcraft Cafe.
I like it. So, do you have any new projects in the works that we haven't heard about yet?
Yes, in fact, I'm starting to make announcements on shows that something cool is coming up in the works. So the company that I work for the D&D book, Storyteller's Forge, they have invited me to, after I'm done with this book, to create the Metcraft tabletop role-playing game. I mean, this is like a dream come true. It's gonna be like Dungeons and Dragons or any other role-playing game, but with my Metcraft world and Metcraft characters and adventures. I'm so completely blown away by that invitation that they say that it's going to be completely in my control. They have in-house game designers, in-house editors, in-house artists, in-house marketers, and they say that I can use all these elements as or as little as I want, depending on how involved I want to be. But starting in hopefully January, maybe February, I will be starting to work on the rules for this tabletop role-playing game set in my Metcraft world. I'm completely blown away and honored that they invited me to do this.
That is amazing. Congratulations.
Thanks. Total dream come true.
Absolutely. My goodness. Well, we are running out of time, so I want to thank you for being a guest here today on this amazing Friday the 13th. What better day to get together, honestly.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom and all of your amazing projects with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Stay tuned for more thrilling tales and captivating insights, and maybe in a dash of the unexplained. I'm your host, Brittani Starr, bidding you a very spooky farewell. Thank you, my friends, for joining on this journey into the mystical and the unknown. We hope you've enjoyed our Friday the 13th special, filled with enchanting stories and spirited discussions. Stay tuned for more captivating episodes of The Brittani Starr Show, where we uncover the secrets of the soul and explore the realms of the imagination. Until next time, my friends.
Remember, my most affectionate viewers and listeners, the next time you encounter a black cat, consider it a guardian of secrets and a bearer of good fortune. This is Rebecca Height, the award-winning author with the Zarlequin Podcast.
May your days be filled with magic, your nights with wonder, and your dreams with endless possibilities. Remember, stay magical, my friends.